They looked like the kind of family you'd see in a Hallmark commercial. A good-looking couple, two bright-eyed daughters, and a baby on the way. Their social media pages were a carefully curated mosaic of smiles, vacations, birthdays, and matching outfits. Shanann Watts was the engine behind this online portrait of perfection. She was active, expressive, and confident, a self-described Thrive brand ambassador and mompreneur. Her posts were frequent and polished, daily updates, affirmations, and videos of her playing with the kids or promoting her business. Chris Watts, her husband, played his part too. Quiet, reserved, and physically fit, he appeared in videos with a calm demeanor and an affable smile. To the outside world, Chris seemed like the ideal husband, helpful, steady, and supportive. Their daughters, Bella and CeCe, were adored by their online followers. Photos showed them giggling in tutus, singing in the back seat, or napping on their dad's chest. Shanann captioned each moment with warmth and affection. My little blessings, or Daddy's girls. But behind the camera, something was happening. Shanann's posts began to carry a subtle tone shift, more affirmations about strength, resilience, and loyalty. She started sharing more motivational content, especially about relationships and deserving more. Viewers didn't notice it at the time, but in hindsight, it was there, cracks showing through the gloss. The irony? These online moments would later become critical pieces of evidence. They weren't just memories, they were timestamps, location markers, and emotional indicators. Detectives, lawyers, and the public would later scroll through her Facebook timeline like a breadcrumb trail through a collapsing life. At the time, no one suspected a thing. Neighbors waved at them in the driveway. Chris mowed the lawn. Shanann took the girls to birthday parties. They looked happy. But if you paused the video, if you zoomed in on Chris's eyes during those family live streams, there was a flicker, a hesitation, a detachment that didn't fit. And once you saw it, you couldn't unsee it. Shanann's rise as a social media personality wasn't accidental. Before Thrive, before the videos and lifestyle posts, she was a woman rebuilding herself from scratch. She'd been through a difficult divorce, battled lupus, and worked relentlessly to create stability for herself and her daughter. Then she met Chris. From the start, Shanann documented everything: their first dates, their wedding, their new home in Frederick, Colorado. Her online persona wasn't fake, it was aspirational. But it also became a performance. The likes, shares, and comments weren't just engagement metrics. They were validation, proof that life was on track. As their family grew, so did Shanann's online presence. She filmed product demos from her kitchen, life updates from her car, and cute moments with the girls on the living room floor. She called her followers friends and often shared deeply personal insights, struggles with pregnancy, financial worries, marriage stress. Chris, by contrast, rarely posted. He didn't like being on camera. He smiled when she aimed the phone at him, but said little. Behind closed doors, he was pulling away, emotionally, physically, spiritually. Shanann could feel it. She messaged friends late at night, asking for advice. She complained that Chris had become distant, disinterested. At one point, she wrote, "He's not the same person I married." She worried he was having an affair, or worse, that he simply didn't love her anymore. Still, Shanann kept posting. The house was immaculate. The girls wore coordinated outfits. She even filmed Chris reading to the kids, smiling as if nothing was wrong. But something was wrong. Chris had started going to the gym more, not just to stay in shape, but to impress someone else. He was texting constantly, guarding his phone, and changing his schedule. Shanann noticed. She began documenting that too, not on Facebook, but in private notes, messages, screenshots. In the weeks leading up to her death, she took a business trip to Arizona and left the girls with Chris. The photos from that weekend, still smiling, still perfect. But the truth was closing in. This wasn't just a family under strain. It was a family on the brink. And Chris Watts had already made his decision. August 13th, 2018. It was supposed to be an ordinary Monday in Frederick, Colorado. The morning sun rose over quiet cul-de-sacs. Kids boarded school buses, and people drove off to work. But something was already off at 2825 Saratoga Trail. At 8:15 a.m., Shanann Watts missed her obstetrics appointment. She was 15 weeks pregnant and had never skipped a checkup. Her friend and colleague Nico Atkinson had dropped her off from a work trip the night before and immediately noticed Shanann seemed unusually quiet, drained. Still, Nico didn't expect her friend to go radio silent the next morning. By 9 a.m., text messages to Shanann went unanswered. By 11 o'clock, her phone rang without response, and by early afternoon, Nicole wasn't just concerned, she was alarmed. She drove to Shanann's house, rang the doorbell, knocked, and finally called 911. It wasn't just that her friend was missing, it was the eerie stillness of the house. Shanann's car was still in the garage with the girls' car seats inside. Her shoes, ones she always wore, were by the front door. No sign of forced entry, no commotion, no chaos. Frederick police responded quickly. By 1:40 p.m., Officer Coonrod arrived and began the initial wellness check. Chris Watts pulled up shortly after, wearing a backward ball cap and a calm expression. He unlocked the door. He led them through the house. He explained that Shanann had said she was taking the girls to a play date that morning. Maybe she just didn't tell anyone where. But Nicole didn't buy it. She insisted Shanann wouldn't vanish without telling her. And then they found her purse and her phone. Still plugged in by the couch, Shanann's phone was the first red flag that couldn't be rationalized away. She never left it behind. Not for 5 minutes, let alone an entire day. Chris's behavior during this check would later be dissected by millions. He was cooperative, but oddly detached. He joked with officers. He looked at his phone. He didn't cry. The house was neat. Too neat. No signs of struggle, no blood, but an emptiness that felt deliberate. Nichols' 911 call, captured on body cam, marked the beginning of what would become one of the most chilling missing persons cases in modern American history. And in that first afternoon, no one, not even the officers, realized just how quickly this case would spiral. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the Rockies, news of Shanann's disappearance began to circulate. Chris Watts stood in the driveway, arms folded, giving interviews to local TV reporters. His face was composed, his tone calm, even hopeful. He said he just wanted his family back. He asked Shanann to come home. He said they'd had an emotional conversation the night before, but insisted she was just gone. But something didn't sit right. Not with the reporters, not with the police, and not with the internet. The footage of Chris's on-camera plea spread fast. People online began dissecting every blink, every shrug, every deflection. Why wasn't he looking into the camera? Why was he smiling? Meanwhile, investigators were quietly building a picture, and it didn't match Chris's version. Inside the house, they saw no sign of a woman packing up and leaving voluntarily. No clothes missing, no toiletries taken, no diapers, wipes, or snacks for the girls. Only absence. Chris said Shanann took the girls to a friend's house, but he couldn't name which friend. He said she left her phone behind by accident, but it was plugged in, charging, exactly where she always left it at night. Even the family dog Dieter was still at home, unfed and nervous. Shanann would never have left him behind. When Chris left the police that night, officers were already talking in hushed tones. One of them reportedly said, "This doesn't feel like a missing persons case. This feels like a cover-up." At the same time, Shanann's friends were mobilizing. Flyers went out. A Facebook group was created. News trucks began parking on the street. Neighbors were interviewed, and surveillance footage started to surface, including a critical clip from the next-door neighbor's security camera. It showed Chris backing his truck into the driveway in the early morning hours of August 13th. Unusual. He never parked like that. And he spent over an hour loading something, or someone, into the back. Investigators requested a formal interview. Chris agreed, but the tension was rising. Something wasn't right. Not with his body language, not with his timeline, not with his eyes. And the next day, he would walk straight into a polygraph room. August 15th, 2018. Just 2 days after Shanann and the girls were reported missing, Chris Watts voluntarily walked into the Frederick Police Department to take a polygraph test. To the public, it looked like the actions of a concerned husband. To investigators, it was a calculated risk, one they believed would break him. The test was administered by Tammy Lee, a seasoned FBI agent and polygraph expert. From the moment Chris sat down, the interview room became a stage. 2 chairs, 1 table, no distractions, just a man under pressure and a woman trained to read more than just words. Before the wires even went on, Tammy started the real work, the pre-interview. This phase wasn't just about calibrating the machine. It was about psychology. She asked about his relationship with Shanann. She pressed gently on his emotional state. She asked how he slept, how he felt, what he thought might have happened. Chris answered everything, calmly, methodically, flatly. But his answers had gaps. He claimed Shanann had returned from a business trip around 2 a.m., and they'd had an emotional but civil conversation. He said he'd left for work early in the morning and hadn't seen his family since. He had no theory about where they were, no guesses, no breakdowns. Tammy noted it all. Then came the test itself. Chris was wired up, asked a baseline series of questions. His name, the date, basic facts, followed by the real ones. Did you physically harm Shanann? Do you know where Shanann is now? Are you lying about the last time you saw her? The needles on the machine moved with every breath, every pulse, every microscopic tremor. Afterward, Chris looked hopeful. He thought he'd passed. But Tammy didn't flinch. She left the room, spoke to her team, and came back with a statement that would become iconic. "Chris," she said, "you did not pass the polygraph." He froze. She leaned in. "Now is the time to be honest." Chris didn't speak right away. He blinked. He stared at the floor. He rubbed his hands together and tried to form words, but nothing coherent came out. Tammy Lee didn't raise her voice. She didn't accuse him. Instead, she gave him an exit. Maybe this was an accident. Maybe Shanann hurt the kids. Maybe you were just trying to fix it. It was a carefully calculated move, a known interrogation tactic called the minimization technique. The goal wasn't to shout someone into a confession. It was to give them a version of events that felt survivable. But Chris still didn't bite. So they brought in a second interrogator, Graham Coder from the FBI. He was softer, more paternal. He sat close. He told Chris that now was the time to stop pretending, that they already knew something had happened. "We can't help you," Coder said. If you don't help yourself. Chris nodded slowly. His jaw tensed. He whispered, I just want to talk to my dad. Investigators seized the opportunity. They brought in Ronnie Watts, Chris's father, a quiet man from North Carolina who had driven to Colorado to support his son. Ronnie walked in, unaware that the next 10 minutes would change everything. Chris looked at his father. He hesitated. Then, quietly, he said, She hurt them. And then He didn't finish the sentence, but the implication was clear. He was now claiming that Shanann had killed the girls, and that he, in a rage, had killed her. It was a story detectives didn't believe, but it was a confession. And now, Chris Watts had officially gone from grieving husband to suspect. The mask had cracked, but the truth, the real truth, was still buried deeper. And the next morning, they'd find it in an oil field. While Chris was sitting in the interrogation room spinning half-truths, investigators were already closing in from another angle. Technology. Chris drove a company truck for Anadarko Petroleum. That truck was equipped with GPS tracking, and its data revealed something chilling. In the early morning hours of August 13th, the same day Shanann was reported missing, the truck had left the Watts home at 5:27 a.m. It traveled to a remote oil site called Survey 319, a desolate patch of land nearly 45 minutes away. Chris claimed he had gone there to check on a leaking oil well, but GPS data showed he stayed at that site for nearly 2 hours, far longer than any normal maintenance job. That location now became the focus of the search. Meanwhile, Chris was taken into custody on suspicion of murder. He had confessed partially, but investigators knew his story didn't match the evidence. They filed for search warrants for the oil site, and the next morning, a team of technicians, cadaver dogs, and forensic examiners headed out to Survey 319. What they found would end the search and break the nation's heart. Before officers even arrived at the tanks, dogs signaled human remains in the surrounding brush. And then they saw it, a shallow grave, covered loosely with dirt and brush. Inside, they found the body of Shanann Watts. She had been wrapped in a sheet, one that matched her bed linen set back at the house. A few yards away, officers inspected the 2 oil tanks. Massive, metal, and sealed. When the lids were opened, the forensic team made a horrifying discovery. The bodies of Bella and Celeste were inside, each deposited in a separate tank. The openings were only 8 inches wide. To place them inside, Chris would have had to force their small bodies through those narrow hatches. It was unthinkable, but now undeniable. The crime scene was processed for hours. Photos, soil samples, fingerprints, everything was logged. Forensic teams used special tools to extract the remains from the oil mixture, preserving as much evidence as possible. By that evening, the story had gone from a missing persons case to a national tragedy. Cable news stations interrupted broadcasts. Twitter exploded. And people everywhere asked, why? But before the country could get answers, the police needed one more thing, a full confession. And they were about to get it. The recovery at Survey 319 was among the most emotionally devastating crime scenes ever documented in Colorado. Even seasoned investigators struggled to process what they were witnessing. Shanann's shallow grave was barely concealed, a symbolic gesture of disposal rather than concealment. Her body showed no signs of external trauma visible to the naked eye, but the sheet she was wrapped in would later reveal trace evidence. Nearby, detectives recovered a rake, believed to have been used to cover the soil. Everything about the burial was hasty, rushed, panicked, and deeply impersonal. But it was the oil tanks that truly horrified the forensic team. Bella and Celeste had been submerged in crude oil for nearly 48 hours. The temperature inside those tanks reached extreme levels, and the corrosive environment had already begun to affect the remains. Extracting them required industrial tools and protective hazmat suits. The openings, just 8 inches in diameter, raised immediate forensic and psychological questions. How could a father do something so mechanically calculated to his own children? What was going through his mind as he lifted the lid, hoisted each girl, and forced them through? Autopsies would later reveal bruising around Bella's mouth, and a heartbreaking detail. She may have been alive, or at least conscious, when placed in the tank. She had fought back. Celeste, younger and smaller, showed no such defensive signs. Her death, too, was brutal, but quieter. The oil preserved some trace evidence: hair, fibers, skin cells. It all told a story Chris Watts tried to erase, but couldn't. Back in the forensic lab, investigators reconstructed the timeline using GPS, phone pings, and surveillance footage. They matched the truck's route to Chris's cell phone data and home security logs. Everything lined up, but not with his story. Even more damning were the interviews with neighbors. One of them, whose security camera had captured Chris's early morning truck activity, told police, "He never backs his truck into the driveway. Never." That was the first time. And that night, when police showed that footage to Chris in the interview room, his composure cracked. He put his hands on his head. He mumbled. He shifted in his seat. The illusion was unraveling. Frame by frame, GPS ping by GPS ping. The evidence was now overwhelming. The only thing missing was why. In every true crime story, there's a pivot, a moment when everything shifts. For Chris Watts, that moment had a name: Nico Kessinger. Nico was a geologist at Anadarko Petroleum, the same company where Chris worked. They met in the summer of 2018, just weeks before the murders. It started as casual flirtation, friendly exchanges, shared jokes, late-night texts. But it escalated quickly. Nico told investigators that Chris portrayed himself as a divorcing father, a man emotionally distant from his wife, looking for peace and a fresh start. He never told her Shanann was pregnant. He never mentioned any real plans to fix his marriage. He presented himself as already halfway out the door. They began seeing each other frequently. Dates, intimate weekends, late-night phone calls that lasted for hours. Chris saved selfies from Nico on a secret calculator app. He looked up vacation spots on his phone, romantic getaways, future plans. He Googled wedding songs and how to start a new life after divorce. But there was a catch. Chris didn't file for divorce. He didn't tell Shanann about Nico. Instead, he kept living both lives, smiling on camera with his family, then texting Nico minutes later about how much he missed her. As the weeks went on, Shanann became suspicious. She saw him growing more distant. He avoided physical affection. He seemed emotionally checked out. In one message to a friend, Shanann wrote, "He's not touching me. He doesn't talk to me. I feel like I'm living with a stranger." Meanwhile, Chris told Nico everything was fine. He said he was handling things. He assured her it was almost over. What Nico didn't know, what she couldn't have known, was that Chris had no intention of negotiating a separation. He was preparing something else. And as the date of Shanann's return from her business trip approached, Chris's internet history revealed a chilling trail. Searches for how to delete Facebook, can police trace text messages, and what happens to cheating husbands in divorce court. Nico would later tell investigators that Chris seemed nervous in those final days. He told her he was scared and overwhelmed, but he never admitted what he was planning. By the time Nickel realized something was terribly wrong, it was already too late. Chris Watts wasn't just cheating. He was fantasizing about a completely new life, one that didn't include Shanann, Bella, Celeste, or even the baby on the way. Investigators would later uncover a disturbing amount of digital evidence showing how far he had mentally detached from his family. In the weeks leading up to the murders, Chris had created a new financial budget. It didn't include diapers. It didn't include preschool. It didn't include Shanann's medical expenses. It was a single-man budget, a clean slate. He Googled starting a new life and how to prepare for separation. He deleted text messages, wiped apps, and even began looking at apartments. But he never consulted a divorce lawyer. Because in his mind, divorce was messy. Murder was final. Nicole Kessinger, for her part, insisted she had no knowledge of what Chris was planning. When confronted by detectives, she was visibly shaken. She cooperated fully, handing over her phone, her search history, even her personal notes. She told them she would have never continued the relationship if she had known Shanann was pregnant, or even that the marriage wasn't actually ending. But public sentiment quickly turned on her. Within days, her name was dragged through every newsfeed and YouTube comment section. People called her the mistress, the reason, the motive. She received threats. She had to go into hiding. Yet all signs still pointed back to one man. Chris had built a fantasy, not just of being with Nicole, but of erasing every obstacle between him and that fantasy. To him, Shanann wasn't a wife. She was a barrier. Bella and Celeste weren't daughters, they were complications. And the pregnancy? That was the final trigger. In the aftermath, psychologists would argue that Chris didn't snap. He planned. Every search, every deleted file, every detail of that morning. By the time he loaded the truck, the murders had already happened in his mind. Nicole never asked him to kill, but Chris believed that only a total reset would give him what he wanted. A clean future, a new woman, and no trace of the past. After the partial confession in the interrogation room, the story that Shanann had killed the girls and Chris had reacted, investigators weren't satisfied. They didn't believe it. Neither did the public. There was no evidence to support Chris's version. No signs Shanann had harmed the children. No motive, no prior behavior, no forensic proof. The confession felt manufactured, an attempt to soften the blow, to shift some of the blame. And so, prosecutors applied pressure. They charged Chris with 5 counts of first-degree murder, 1 for each family member, plus additional charges for the deaths of his daughters under the age of 12. They added tampering with a body and unlawful termination of a pregnancy. Chris was now facing life without parole, or worse. At first, he stayed silent. His legal team weighed the risks of going to trial. But public outrage was growing by the hour. The evidence was airtight, and a jury would not be forgiving. So, on November 6, 2018, Chris made a decision. He would plead guilty to all charges. No trial, no defense. Just a single devastating admission. He had killed his pregnant wife and both of his daughters in cold blood. In court, his voice was barely audible. He answered the judge's questions with, "Yes, sir," and "No, sir." He never made a statement. He never explained why. Shanann's family was there. They wept quietly as the judge read each count aloud. The courtroom was silent, heavy with disbelief. Outside, reporters scrambled to update headlines. Social media exploded, and Nicole Kessinger, who had disappeared from public view, was watching from the shadows. But for many, the plea wasn't enough. They wanted to know what really happened inside that house. What the girls said. How it all unfolded. The confession covered the crime, but not the truth. That would come months later in a Colorado prison. In February 2019, 3 months after his guilty plea, Chris Watts sat down for a 5-hour prison interview with agents from the FBI and the Colorado Bureau of Investigation. He waived his right to counsel. He said he was ready to come clean. What followed was one of the most disturbing and detailed confessions ever recorded in a true crime investigation. Chris began by admitting what everyone already suspected. His earlier version, that Shanann killed the girls, was a lie. He had killed them all. He said it started with an argument in the early morning hours of August 13th. Shanann confronted him about the affair. She told him she knew about Nico and said he'd never see the kids again. That's when, according to Chris, he snapped. He got on top of her in bed and strangled her with his bare hands. He told investigators he felt nothing. No rage, no panic, just silence. Then Bella came into the room. She saw Shanann's body and asked, "What's wrong with Mommy?" Chris told her Mommy wasn't feeling well. He wrapped Shanann's body in a sheet, dragged it downstairs, and loaded it into the truck. Then he placed his daughters, still alive, into the back seat with their mother's body lying at their feet. He drove 45 minutes to the oil field with them, sitting in silence. Bella reportedly asked, "Are you going to do the same thing to me?" At Survey 319, he smothered Celeste first, then Bella. According to the autopsy, Bella had bite marks on her tongue. She fought back. She screamed. She knew. Chris said she was the last to die. He said her final words were, "Daddy, no." The room where Chris gave this confession was silent. No one interrupted him. No one asked why. They just let him speak. And when it was over, there was no mystery left. Only horror. Even in death, Shanann Watts left behind a voice that couldn't be silenced. Her social media posts, texts, voicemails, and videos painted a vivid portrait of a woman fighting for her marriage, her children, and her sense of self. She wasn't naive. She sensed something was wrong. Friends described her as increasingly anxious during the final months. She told them Chris was distant, cold, distracted. And yet, she clung to hope. In text messages to a close friend, Shanann wrote, "He says he's not in love with me anymore. He said we're not compatible." She followed it with, "I'm trying to fix it. I'm fighting for our marriage." During her work trip to Arizona, she texted Chris, "I miss you. I miss your laugh. I miss holding you. I miss everything about you." He didn't respond. The texts grew more desperate. She started to ask if he was seeing someone else. She even searched his phone bill records, trying to make sense of late-night calls to unknown numbers. But Shanann didn't just communicate with friends. She documented her life publicly, for clients, family, and followers. Her Facebook videos were filled with laughter and affection. She often filmed the girls playing, dancing, or cuddling with Chris. The optics were perfect, but her private writings told another story. In a draft letter found on her phone, never sent, she wrote, "You've changed so much. I don't know who you are anymore. I feel like you're here, but you're gone." She was trying to hold a family together that was already gone in his mind. One of the most haunting videos she posted was of Chris surprising her with a baby announcement shirt, months earlier, when he still pretended to be excited. The video shows her smiling, holding a pregnancy test. Chris is awkward, quiet, and offers a forced hug. Even the audience noticed. Comments under the video. "Why does he look so weird? He doesn't seem happy." In retrospect, Shanann's digital trail was more than documentation. It was a testament, a record of love, fear, and confusion. a woman desperately trying to keep her family whole, unaware that it was already being dismantled. She left behind more than evidence. She left behind truth. In the chaos of adult lies, emotional detachment, and hidden affairs, it's easy to forget who suffered the most. But the final days of Bella and Celeste Watts, known lovingly as CeCe, are the darkest, most painful part of this story. They were just children. Bella, 4 years old, was gentle and observant. CeCe, only 3, was feisty, curious, and full of energy. Together they were inseparable. Two sisters navigating a world they trusted completely, especially when it came to their father. Photos from those last weeks show smiles, ice cream cones, pool days, and family outings. But beneath the surface, their world was unraveling. Chris was growing more distant. Shanann noticed it. The girls felt it. One friend recalled Bella asking her mother, "Why doesn't Daddy play with me anymore?" It wasn't just a childish whim. It was emotional recognition. A daughter sensing something adults tried to hide. The weekend before the murders, Shanann had been on a business trip. The girls stayed home with Chris. We don't know exactly what happened in those 48 hours, but surveillance footage shows them returning from a birthday party. The girls were tired. Chris was quiet. And then, the morning of August 13th. We now know from Chris's confession that the girls were awake when Shanann was killed. He said Bella walked into the room afterward and saw something was wrong. He didn't explain what he told them, only that they didn't ask many questions. They followed him. He loaded Shanann's body into the truck. Then, he placed Bella and CeCe in the back seat. That ride, 45 minutes to the oil field, is unimaginable. Shanann's body lay beneath a blanket in the trunk space, while her daughters sat behind their father, still alive, still trusting him. Chris claims CeCe was the first to die. He smothered her with a blanket while Bella watched. Then, he turned to Bella. In his prison confession, he recalled her final words. "Is the same thing going to happen to me?" She fought back. She begged. Her final plea, as he would later admit, was, "Daddy, no." Those words haunted investigators. They haunt the public still, because they weren't just victims. They were children, and they trusted the man who ended their lives. Their voices were never heard in court. They never got to testify, but their final moments spoke volumes. Frederick, Colorado, was a small, quiet town. The kind of place where people didn't lock their doors and kids played in the cul-de-sac until dark. The Watts family had blended into that rhythm perfectly. Neighbors waved. Garbage cans were wheeled out in sync. Birthday parties spilled into driveways. Then it all shattered. As the truth came out, disbelief turned into grief, and grief into outrage. Neighbors stood on their porches, arms folded, watching reporters descend. Satellite trucks lined Saratoga Trail. Police taped off the Watts home. And suddenly, the idyllic two-story house with its manicured lawn became a crime scene known around the world. The surveillance camera footage, the polygraph test, the body cam videos, all of it became public. And with it came a growing sense of betrayal. This wasn't just about a murder. It was about the rupture of trust, the corruption of fatherhood, the desecration of innocence. Frederick had never seen anything like it. Counselors were brought into schools. Churches held vigils. Stuffed animals and candles lined the front yard of the now vacant Watts home. People weren't just mourning. They were searching for meaning. How could someone so ordinary commit something so monstrous? Former coworkers of Chris expressed shock. "He was quiet, dependable," one said. "He brought lunch in Tupperware. Talked about his kids all the time." But now, Every story seemed to contain a red flag in retrospect. Moments that hadn't made sense before suddenly clicked into place. Chris's demeanor in the days following the murders was dissected like evidence. His calmness, his decision to go on camera, his refusal to break down. It wasn't grief, people realized. It was performance. The town recoiled, not just from the crime, but from the illusion that had preceded it. And that realization would ripple far beyond Colorado, because the media was only just getting started. The murders of Shanann, Bella, Celeste, and unborn baby Nico sent shockwaves not just through Colorado, but across the entire world. True crime fans, psychologists, mothers, fathers, people from every background found themselves captivated, horrified, and enraged. Within days, the story became global. News outlets ran wall-to-wall coverage. CNN, BBC, Australia's 60 Minutes. The Watts case was everywhere. Not just because of what happened, but how it happened. It was the betrayal, the mask, the smiling family man who turned out to be a killer. Documentaries followed. YouTube exploded with theories, analysis, and breakdowns. Netflix released American Murder: The Family Next Door, a viral hit that used Shanann's own videos and texts to tell the story. It reached millions within weeks, and it reframed the narrative, not just as a crime, but as a warning about facades, social media, and the illusion of perfection. Podcasts dedicated entire seasons to the case. Experts debated whether Chris Watts was a narcissist, a sociopath, or something even more complex. People dissected his body language and polygraph footage. Some sympathized with Nicole Kessinger. Others vilified her. Memorial pages popped up online for Shanann and the girls. Strangers sent letters to Shanann's parents, offering condolences. The town of Frederick renamed a park bench in honor of the Watts children. But not everyone responded with empathy. Conspiracy theories sprouted like weeds. Some claimed Shanann was abusive. Others insisted Chris was framed. YouTubers profited off wild speculation. The family became targets of harassment. It was a modern phenomenon, a crime that didn't just stay in the courtroom, but lived on in hashtags, live streams, and comment sections. In a digital world, even grief can be viral. And yet, through the noise, one thing never changed: the victims. Shanann, Bella, Celeste, Nico. Their names still echo in the minds of those who follow the case. Not because they were perfect, but because they were real, and what was taken from them can never be restored. Chris Watts is now inmate number 674796 in Dodge Correctional Institution, a maximum security prison in Walpin, Wisconsin. He was transferred there in late 2018, shortly after his conviction, due to safety concerns in Colorado. Even among murderers, his crimes put him at risk. Inmates with a history of violence against children are considered targets in prison hierarchy. And Chris, a man who ended the lives of his entire family, became one of the most reviled. His days are monotonous. He wakes at 5 a.m. His cell is small, 6 by 8 feet, furnished with only a bed, a toilet, and a steel desk. Meals are served through a slot in the door. Recreation is limited and closely monitored. He works a custodial job within the facility, earning just a few cents an hour. No internet, no direct access to media. But that doesn't mean he's isolated from the outside world. Chris still receives letters, hundreds of them. Some from people offering prayers, others from true crime obsessives, and disturbingly, some from women who claim to love him. In one letter, a woman wrote, "You made a mistake, but I believe in forgiveness." Another wrote, "I wish I could take care of you. You deserve happiness." These letters reflect something dark and complex. The psychology of infamy, the allure of evil, the need some people feel to fix the broken. But Chris doesn't respond to most of them. When he does, it's brief, polite, detached. He spends most of his time reading the Bible, according to reports. He told one interviewer that he had found God in prison, that he prays for forgiveness every day. To some, it sounds hollow. To others, manipulative. But in prison, it's a survival strategy. He avoids conflict, keeps his head down, follows the rules, but he can't avoid the truth. Every guard, every inmate, every passing headline is a reminder of who he is and what he did. And there are no appeals, no second chances. Chris Watts will die in prison. The letters didn't stop. Even after the Netflix documentary, even after the full confession, even after the autopsy reports were made public, Chris Watts became an object of twisted fascination. Not just a killer, but a character. Someone people projected their fantasies, anger, or forgiveness onto. Some of the letters were romantic. Others were theological. Some were disturbing in their own right. A woman in Florida wrote to him for months, calling him her soulmate. Another sent photos of herself in lingerie. Some sent Bible verses. Some sent money orders, tiny amounts, a few dollars at a time, placed into his commissary account. There was a pattern to many of these correspondence. They were often isolated, deeply religious, or fascinated with high-profile criminals. Some believed they could save him. Others seemed to be chasing their own need for recognition by reaching someone infamous. Chris read them all. He kept some. He threw others away. In rare cases, he responded. His handwriting was neat, almost formal. He wrote about God, guilt, prayer, but never about Shanann, never about the girls. He avoided emotion. To prison staff, the attention was bizarre, but not unprecedented. It happens with many high-profile killers. Ted Bundy, Scott Peterson. Now, Chris Watts. In fact, the volume of his mail became so heavy at one point that it had to be screened before reaching his cell. Some letters were so graphic, sexually or violently, they were flagged as psychological risk indicators. And then there were the angry letters. Some arrived in red ink. Others came with threats, photos of the girls, or Bible verses circled in blood. A few contained only one word, repeated over and over, monster. Chris said nothing about those. He kept his head down. He prayed louder, but everyone knew he read them. Because behind the walls of Dodge Correctional, no punishment could compare to this. Being remembered. Every day. For the worst thing you ever did. For Shanann's family, the Razucheks, the pain didn't end with Chris's confession. It only deepened. Frank and Sandra Razuchek lost not only their daughter, but their two granddaughters, an unborn grandson. Their grief was layered, not just loss, but betrayal. Chris had lived in their home. He'd vacationed with them. He called them Mom and Dad. And then he took everything from them. In court, Frank stood up during sentencing and read a statement that silenced the room. I trusted you to take care of them, not kill them. His voice cracked. He said he had nightmares, that he still waited for Bella and CeCe to come running into his arms. Sandra, Shanann's mother, couldn't bring herself to speak publicly for months. When she finally did, she said, I forgave you, Chris. But that doesn't mean I'll ever understand. The Razucheks moved out of North Carolina for a time, seeking privacy. They were harassed online by conspiracy theorists. People claimed Shanann was abusive, or that the murders were staged. Some even accused the family of being paid actors. To protect their mental health, they filed a wrongful death lawsuit, not for money, but to establish legal closure. They won the case. A judge awarded them $6 million in damages. Chris would never be able to pay, but the ruling symbolically stripped him of any legal right to profit from the story. The Razucheks visited Shanann's grave often. They held annual candlelight vigils. They wore purple, her favorite color, on the anniversary of her death. And they kept her Facebook page online, not to relive the trauma, but to preserve her voice. They said they wanted the world to remember who she was: a mother, a fighter, a woman who loved fiercely and never gave up on her family. But behind the strength was bottomless pain, because grief, for them, wasn't a season. It was a sentence. The Watts name, once just another entry in a suburban phone book, became synonymous with betrayal, horror, and the destruction of a family from within. Chris's parents, Cindy and Ronnie Watts, were thrust into the spotlight alongside the Razucheks, but their response was very different. From the beginning, Cindy Watts struggled to accept the version of events laid out by police and prosecutors. She claimed Chris had been manipulated. She suggested Shanann was controlling and that the relationship had been toxic on both sides. This stance brought deep tension and public backlash. To many, it felt like victim blaming. To others, it sounded like denial. The Watts family became fractured. They stopped speaking to the Rucheks. They avoided the media for long periods. And when they did speak, it was carefully worded, often focused more on Chris's emotional state than the lives he had taken. Still, they visited him. They sent letters. Cindy gave a televised interview in which she said, "He's not a monster. He's my son. I still love him." It was a complex dynamic. Love for a child tangled with revulsion at his choices. A mother trying to separate the man she raised from the killer he became. Public reaction was harsh. Petitions circulated to bar the family from profiting off interviews or appearances. YouTube channels dissected their every word. Some sympathized. Parents unable to give up on a child. Others were furious, demanding silence from anyone defending Chris. What remained of the Watts name was now filtered through a single lens. A man who murdered his entire family to chase a fantasy. The house on Saratoga Trail sat empty. Eventually, it was foreclosed. Neighbors avoided it. Tourists drove by to take photos. In the years that followed, the Watts name faded from headlines, but stayed alive in the algorithm. A cautionary tale resurfaced by documentaries, reaction videos, and hashtags. There would be no redemption arc, no rebranding, only a legacy scorched into the memory of a community and a country. When the dust settled and the evidence was laid bare, one question echoed louder than any other. Why did he do it? Chris Watts didn't fit the mold of a traditional killer. No history of violence, no criminal record, no substance abuse. He was a husband, a father, an employee with steady work and a clean image. And yet, he committed one of the most incomprehensible crimes imaginable. Not in a fit of rage, but with methodical planning. Psychologists, criminologists, and profilers dove into the case, trying to understand what lay beneath the surface of his smile. What they found was not a monster in the cinematic sense, but something more chilling: emptiness. Chris displayed traits aligned with covert narcissism. He sought validation not through aggression, but through image. The image of the perfect family, the loyal husband, the fit father. He was addicted to approval, not connection. But when that image cracked, when Shanann's pregnancy clashed with his affair, his finances, and his craving for control, he began to see his family not as people, but as obstacles. He didn't explode. He withdrew. And then, he erased. Experts noted his emotional flatness, his refusal to accept responsibility in the early interviews, his willingness to lie directly to grieving parents, to reporters, to the police, not out of panic, but as a form of preservation. Dr. Phil, who consulted with law enforcement on the case, called Chris pathologically passive. Not someone who kills in rage, but someone who kills to eliminate discomfort. Even his own attorneys were disturbed by the lack of visible grief. They described him as cooperative, quiet, and empty. When asked why he didn't simply divorce Shanann, his answer was telling, "I didn't want to hurt anyone." But of course, he did, irrevocably. And that contradiction is at the core of who he is. A man so conflict-averse that he would rather destroy his entire world than confront it honestly. It wasn't about hate. It was about escape. The Watts family left behind no last words, no handwritten letters, no final goodbyes. But in the age of smartphones and social media, they left something else, a digital archive. Thousands of photos, videos, messages, calendar entries, health app logs, search histories, GPS pings, text messages that now read like a countdown. It's all still there. Fragments of a family that once seemed whole. Moments frozen in time, unaware of the fate that awaited them. Shanann's Facebook profile remains online as a memorial. Visitors can scroll through birthday parties, Thrive promotions, family vacations, and dance recitals. Each post is now haunted. Each caption layered with painful hindsight. One post shows Bella hugging Chris, her arms tight around his neck. The caption reads, "She loves her daddy more than anything in the world." Another features CeCe in a princess dress, blowing kisses at the camera. Shanann had written, "My little firecracker, never a dull moment." And then there are the videos. Chris building snowmen with the girls, Chris unwrapping presents, Chris grinning awkwardly as Shanann films yet another update for her business. To the average viewer, it's ordinary. But for those who know how the story ends, it's unbearable. Investigators use these archives not just as evidence, but as behavioral timelines. They plotted Chris's emotional withdrawal. They saw Shanann's growing anxiety. They watched the family dynamic shift, not in dramatic bursts, but in micro movements. The way Chris smiled, the speed at which he replied to messages, the tone in his voice. Even his Apple Health data recorded suspicious things. Steps logged at 4 a.m., the day of the murders, when Chris claimed he was asleep. The truth wasn't hidden in a single clue. It was buried in patterns. And those patterns were only visible because of the archive. Digital ghosts don't knock. They don't cry, but they never go away. They sit in cloud backups, court exhibits, and hard drives, replaying over and over again, waiting for someone to ask, "What didn't we see the first time?" Years have passed since the murders of Shanann, Bella, Celeste, and baby Nico. And yet, the story of Chris Watts continues to echo, not just in headlines, but in search bars, timelines, and YouTube recommendations. The case has become a permanent fixture in the digital landscape. Search "family killer," and his name appears first. Watch one true crime video, and the algorithm feeds you 10 more featuring his face. This wasn't just a crime. It became content. There are hundreds of YouTube documentaries, TikTok theories, reaction videos, and podcast episodes dissecting every moment. Some channels re-upload police body cam footage, slowed down and zoomed in. Others compare Shanann's last texts to Chris's surveillance video movements. Every micro-expression is interpreted. Every word is time-stamped. And the comments, never stop. I can't believe he smiled like that. You can see it in his eyes. She deserved better. For Shanann's family, the internet is both a curse and a preservation tool. Her videos are still watched by strangers. Her voice, so full of energy and love, lives on in the cloud. Bella and CeCe's smiles are reposted weekly by fan memorial pages. But with that permanence comes darkness. Conspiracy theorists continue to publish lies. Some claim Shanann orchestrated it all. Others insist the girls were never real. One YouTube channel even staged a fake ghost hunt outside the Watts home, trying to contact spirits for clicks. The Razucheks have pleaded with the public, let our girls rest. Stop turning our trauma into entertainment. But online, there is no statute of limitations. Every repost, every algorithmic suggestion reanimates the tragedy. And for those drawn to this case, whether out of empathy, horror, or fascination, the danger lies in forgetting that this isn't a story. It was a life. It was 4 lives and one irreversible choice. 1. The murders of Shanann, Bella, Celeste, and Nico shattered more than just a family. They altered how we talk about domestic violence, how we view perfect families online, and how we understand the quiet face of danger. Before Chris Watts, the archetype of the family annihilator was often imagined as explosive, abusive, unhinged. But Chris didn't fit that mold. He smiled. He blended in. He posed for photos with the very people he planned to kill. That contradiction forced society to re-examine its assumptions. It asked uncomfortable questions. How many men like Chris live among us? How many women sense danger but doubt themselves because there are no bruises? How many families are hiding behind curated filters and birthday cake smiles? For advocates of domestic abuse prevention, the Watts case became a rallying point. It reminded the public that control and emotional detachment can be just as deadly as rage. That violence doesn't always shout. Sometimes it whispers. Legislation in Colorado was proposed to increase resources for emotional abuse survivors. Law enforcement agencies updated training on risk assessment, even for individuals with no history of violence. Schools and churches held seminars about warning signs that don't leave marks. True crime, as a genre, changed too. Content creators began issuing disclaimers. Some took steps to block conspiracy comments. Others invited survivors to share their own stories in response. The case shifted the tone from entertainment to remembrance. For the Razucheks, no change in public discourse could ever compensate for what was lost. But they hoped the story would save someone else. And that's where this documentary leaves you. Not just with horror, but with responsibility. To believe people when they say something feels wrong, to look beyond the smile, to ask questions, even when the answers feel uncomfortable, to never confuse the absence of bruises with the presence of safety, because families don't always fall apart. Sometimes they're destroyed by the one person who was supposed to protect them. Chris Watts didn't snap. He plotted. He rehearsed. And for a short time, he nearly pulled it off. His lie began before the murders. He constructed an emotional narrative for himself and others that he was the victim in a loveless marriage, that Shanann was controlling, that he was a good father, just overwhelmed. In private, he was laying groundwork, deleting messages, hiding his affair, avoiding confrontation. In public, he smiled for the camera. After the murders, he moved with calculated precision. He texted Shanann's phone after he had already killed her, trying to create a breadcrumb trail of false concern. He called her friends and claimed she'd gone missing. He let her friend Nico into the house and pretended to be confused. He stood in front of news cameras, begging for her return. "If you're out there, just come home," all while knowing exactly where she was, exactly what he'd done. The body cam footage from that day shows Chris pacing, checking his phone, making small talk. His performance was chilling in its normalcy, but it wasn't perfect. When detectives noticed inconsistencies in his story, small timing issues, vague answers, they didn't pounce. They waited. They asked him to take a polygraph. They played back surveillance footage. They interviewed friends and neighbors. Each piece of evidence chipped away at his facade. The turning point came when he learned that his truck's GPS data and neighbors' camera footage didn't match his version. The lie, so carefully constructed, began to unravel. But even in confession, Chris minimized. He blamed Shanann for the death of the children before admitting to the full truth. And even then, he delivered the truth only when the alternative, trial and exposure, became unbearable. Chris didn't just kill his family. He built a lie large enough to stand inside. And for 72 hours, the world almost believed him. For 72 hours, Chris Watts walked free. He slept in his own bed. He ate meals. He gave interviews. He watched TV while the bodies of his wife and children lay buried in a remote oil field. That gap between crime and consequence is one of the most disturbing elements of this case. Because if just one element had gone differently, he might have gotten away with it. If Nicole Atkinson hadn't insisted on a welfare check, if the neighbor hadn't shared his surveillance footage, if police hadn't acted quickly on inconsistencies, Chris might still be walking the halls of his home, playing the role of a grieving father. His plan wasn't brilliant, but it was just plausible enough. He believed the oil tanks would destroy the evidence. He thought a shallow grave in a field would be missed. He assumed people would believe his wife had taken the girls and left. And for a few hours, some did. His own father hesitated to believe the worst. News reporters broadcasted his appeals without challenge. Social media speculated, some even blaming Shanann for being too intense. But then, the digital trail began to speak. GPS, phone pings, deleted texts recovered. Search histories, camera footage, body language. Piece by piece, Chris's version collapsed under the weight of truth. What's most terrifying isn't that Chris Watts murdered his family. It's that he thought he could lie his way out of it. And for a time, he nearly did. His crime wasn't just an act of violence. It was an act of erasure. Not only did he try to kill his family, he tried to rewrite reality. But reality fought back. Through data, through persistence, through the voices of those who refused to be silenced. Chris Watts almost disappeared into his lie. But the world was watching. In every true crime case, there comes a moment where the audience rewinds the clock, looks for the missed exit, the split in the road where everything might have changed. For the Watts family, that moment might have been August 7th, 2018. Shanann texted a friend, "I'm thinking of separating when I get back." She was exhausted. She felt unloved. And for the first time, she wasn't just worried. She was ready to act. That decision, the possibility of leaving, might have saved her life. But it also may have accelerated what happened. Because in Chris's mind, Shanann leaving wasn't just rejection. It was exposure. If she filed for divorce, the affair would come out. The finances would collapse. His image, that carefully curated life, would fall apart. And to Chris Watts, that was worse than prison. He wasn't trying to escape abuse. He was trying to preserve his fantasy. So when Shanann came home from her business trip, already emotionally distant, already considering separation, Chris panicked. He couldn't lose control. Not of her, not of the girls, not of the narrative. People who reviewed Shanann's texts and call history saw a woman on the edge of a decision, but still hesitating, still hoping, still trying. Had she left sooner? Maybe. Had someone intervened earlier? Maybe. Had Chris just admitted the affair and walked away? Maybe. But Chris Watts wasn't interested in endings that left others standing. He didn't want to be divorced. He wanted to be new. And that desire, for erasure, not resolution, was what made this story inevitable. It wasn't a matter of if, it was a matter of when. It's the question that lingers long after the headlines fade. Could this have been stopped? From the outside, the Watts family looked functional, even ideal. They owned a home, held steady jobs, posted smiling pictures on social media. There were no police calls, no obvious signs of danger. But hindsight reveals subtle warnings. Chris became emotionally unavailable. His behavior changed. Less affection, more time at the gym, constant phone use. Shanann noticed, but didn't know where the line was between marital drift and something darker. Could a therapist have seen the signs? Could a friend have said the right thing? Possibly. But Chris wasn't threatening. He wasn't violent. He was passive, quiet, agreeable. That's what made him so dangerous. Experts now classify family annihilators like Chris into psychological categories. He fits the anomic and self-righteous types, those who kill not out of hatred, but to escape perceived failure. They see their family as extensions of themselves. When control is threatened, they eliminate. In other words, he didn't snap, he planned. And that makes prevention almost impossible without systemic tools. Shanann's text did reveal fear, but she didn't think he'd hurt her. She thought he'd leave. That's why modern domestic violence training now emphasizes pre-violence indicators: withdrawal, secretive behavior, financial secrecy, emotional isolation. Since the Watts case, some states have explored adding coercive control to legal definitions of abuse, behavior that may not be violent, but is still dangerous. But no law, no therapist, no neighbor could have stopped what happened unless Chris wanted to stop himself. And he didn't. So the question shifts from, why didn't someone stop him, to something more painful. Why didn't he stop himself? And the answer is just as hollow as the man who gave none. 2825 Saratoga Trail still stands. The beige two-story home with its neat lawn and brick accents looks like every other house on the block. But it's not. For those who know, it's not a home. It's a grave. After the murders, the house was vacated, sealed, and placed into foreclosure. No one stepped inside without permission. Neighbors avoided looking at it. Children crossed the street to walk past it. The mortgage was never paid again. Technically, it still belongs to Chris Watts, but no bank wants it, and no buyer will take it. The property has gone up for auction multiple times. Each time, the listing is withdrawn. Too much media attention, too much history. Even when listed anonymously, it never sells. Real estate experts call it a stigmatized property, one where value is damaged not by structure, but by memory. This isn't cosmetic. It's psychological. No one wants to cook dinner where Shanann took her last steps. No one wants to sleep in the room where Bella and CeCe were last tucked into bed. No one wants to live above a floor soaked in silence. There are rumors that the house is haunted, cursed, a magnet for bad luck. But it doesn't need ghosts. It has Google. Every person who types in the address will find the story. Photos, crime scene diagrams, news footage, the smiling family on the front porch. Some say the home should be demolished. Others say it should be preserved. a monument to what was lost. But for now, it just sits. Lights off, mailbox empty. A perfect facade over irreversible violence. And the door no one will open. For those closest to the Watts family, the aftermath didn't end in court. It began there. Frank and Sandra Rzucek still wake up to reminders, news alerts, documentaries, YouTube thumbnails, TikTok edits. They didn't choose to become public figures, but grief gave them no option. They've spoken about the nightmares, about seeing Shanann's smile on a screen and remembering what it cost, about hearing Bella's voice in a video and wishing they had one more moment, about CeCe's laugh echoing through old birthday footage. They've tried to protect Shanann's legacy, but it's a fight against an algorithm. Every time someone clicks, it comes back. They live in a world where their daughter's death is repackaged as entertainment. They've asked for empathy, for restraint, for silence. But the internet does not forget, and it rarely forgives. Chris Watts will die behind bars. But the Rzuceks, they live with the sentence. And for them, the punishment is endless. There's no parole from memory, no release from what if, no early exit from loss. They've turned their energy toward awareness campaigns, toward speaking to domestic violence survivors, toward reminding others that emotional abuse is real. That control doesn't always come with bruises, that monsters can look like dads in family photos. They don't want revenge. They want prevention. They want people to listen to the quiet signs. They want women to trust their intuition. They want children to grow up in homes where love doesn't mean fear. And most of all, they want the names Shanann, Bella, Celeste, and Nico to mean more than how they died. They want them remembered for how they lived. She was born Shanann Catherine Rzucek on January 10th, 1984, in New Jersey. A firstborn, a fighter, a daughter who grew up knowing what it meant to persevere. As a teenager, she was diagnosed with lupus, a chronic illness that would have broken many. But not Shanann. She adjusted her life around it. She built a career, bought her first house by 25, and later started her own business. When she met Chris, she thought she had found her peace. They married in 2012. She moved to Colorado. She built a home, both physically and emotionally, a space filled with warmth, goals, planners, schedules, and unconditional love. Shanann was passionate. She loved hard. She filmed everything, not for vanity, but for connection. Her videos weren't performances. They were invitations, a way to share joy, routines, and the chaos of motherhood. She worked as a brand ambassador for Thrive. She believed in helping people feel better, live better, think better. But privately, she was exhausted, raising 2 daughters, managing finances, sensing her husband slip away, and still, she smiled. She held it all together. Those who knew her said she never let her illness slow her down. She was the first to volunteer, the first to celebrate others, the one who always remembered birthdays, anniversaries, milestones. Even in her final hours, returning home after a long work trip, pregnant, drained, she was texting friends to check in on them. She believed in love. She believed in redemption. She believed her marriage could be saved. She was wrong. But her story isn't just how it ended. It's how she lived. With fire. With focus. With love. And that's what she deserves to be remembered for. Bella Marie Watts was born on December 17th, 2013. She was bright, gentle, and old-souled for her age. She loved to sing, especially Disney songs, and would often belt out "Let It Go" with dramatic flair. Her favorite colors were pink and purple. She liked puzzles, story time, and cuddling with her mom. Friends said Bella was the observer, the one who noticed everything. She watched people carefully, She asked thoughtful questions. She always wanted to understand. And in the end, she understood more than anyone could bear. Celeste Catherine Watts, or CeCe, was born on July 17th, 2015. She was pure energy, bold, loud, and funny. Where Bella was cautious, CeCe was fearless. She climbed everything, danced to any song, and laughed like she knew the punchline before it was told. She adored her big sister and followed her everywhere. To Bella, she was a tornado. To Shanann, she was her little firecracker. Together, the girls were inseparable. They shared a room, toys, secrets. Their bond was obvious in every photo. Arms wrapped around each other, matching pajamas, bedtime routines filled with giggles. Then there was Nico Lee Watts, never born, but still remembered. Shanann was 15 weeks pregnant when she was killed. She had already chosen his name, already announced his arrival, already bought him clothes. Nico never took a breath, never cried, never opened his eyes. But he was loved. He had a place in the family, a room waiting, a name embroidered on a onesie. 4 names. Each one stolen, each one buried beneath a headline. But they are more than victims. They were a family. And long after the clicks fade and the views disappear, their names remain Shanann, Bella, CeCe, Nico. Not for how they died, but for how deeply they were loved. Years later, people are still drawn to the story of Chris Watts, not because they enjoy it, but because they don't understand it. It's not just a murder case, it's a paradox. A smiling husband, a cheerful home, 2 perfect daughters, and then annihilation. We keep coming back to the footage, the interviews, the texts. We watch them again and again, hoping something new will stand out. Some moment that explains the turn, the fracture, the moment a man goes from ordinary to monstrous. We look at Chris's face in the body cam footage, his calm voice, his easy gestures. We tell ourselves we would have seen through it, that we would have known, but would we? The truth is, monsters don't always look like monsters, and love doesn't always mean safety. We're fascinated because the Watts story is uncomfortably close to home. It's not a back alley crime, not a shadowy figure in the night. It's bedtime stories, school photos, grocery lists. That's what makes it terrifying. Not the brutality, but the banality. The idea that this could have been anyone, that darkness can live inside the ordinary. This case forces us to confront how little we know about the people around us, about the people closest to us, about ourselves. And in doing so, it dares us to stop looking away. Because maybe if we understand this, we'll see the next one coming. Now that you've heard it all, the timeline, the texts, the lies, the loss, one question remains. What will you do with this story? Will it be just another tab closed? Another documentary watched, filed away, forgotten? Or will you carry it? Will you remember Shanann not just as a victim, but as a mother who fought for her marriage and loved without limits? Will you think of Bella, singing from the back seat, eyes wide with wonder, and CeCe, fearless and full of light? Will you honor Nico, who never got to take his first breath? Because stories like this shouldn't end with entertainment. They should end with awareness. Awareness that not all abusers raise their voices. That emotional distance can be a warning sign. That behind curated photos, someone might be suffering in silence. Maybe it means checking in on a friend who's been pulling away. Maybe it means believing someone the first time they say, something doesn't feel right. Maybe it means teaching our sons that silence isn't strength, and our daughters that control isn't love. Maybe it just means remembering, deeply, intentionally, that these were real people. Shanann, Bella, CeCe, Nico. We say their names not because of how they died, but because we refuse to let them be erased. The Watts case doesn't give us closure. It doesn't offer peace. It offers a mirror. And what we do with that reflection is up to us. Some crimes fade, this one didn't. The murder of Shanann Watts and her children didn't just dominate headlines. It redefined how true crime is consumed. Within weeks, the case had become one of the most searched criminal stories in modern internet history. Not because it was the most violent, but because it was the most visible. Body cam footage, interrogation room clips, polygraph sessions, Facebook videos, Ring doorbell footage, all of it. Raw, accessible, and uploaded for the world to watch. Never before had a family annihilation case unfolded in such real time, with such intimacy. People didn't just read about it. They watched it happen, and it changed everything. YouTube exploded with reaction videos. Commentary channels gained millions of views breaking down Chris's eye movements, Shanann's tone of voice, the girl's behavior in family vlogs. Some creators built entire channels around the Watts case, analyzing, speculating, dramatizing. Netflix released American Murder, The Family Next Door, built entirely from existing footage. No narrator, no reenactments, just raw truth, edited like a thriller. It became one of the most watched documentaries in platform history. Millions saw Shanann smile, Chris lie, and Bella dance, all in chronological order, all real. This wasn't just content, it was voyeurism wrapped in justice. The audience became the analyst. The viewer became the prosecutor. And with that came a new dynamic. The public was no longer just watching true crime, they were building it. Forums formed. Reddit threads dissected footage, frame by frame. TikTok creators reenacted police interviews. Instagram accounts shared aesthetic edits of Shanann and the girls, layered with sad music and candle emojis. And soon, lines blurred between journalism and drama, between empathy and exploitation, between remembering victims and monetizing them. The Watts case wasn't just a tragedy. It was a template, and it raised a new question. When crime becomes content, who really owns the story? In the age of algorithm-driven media, the Watts case didn't end in the courtroom. It entered the comments section. Almost instantly, people online chose sides. Some focused on Chris, dissecting his behavior, labeling him a narcissist, a covert sociopath, a coward. Others turned on Shanann. She was too controlling. She emasculated him. I could see this coming. It wasn't just cruel, it was dangerous. Victim blaming became viral content. Creators uploaded debunking videos claiming Shanann was emotionally abusive, using clips from her Facebook to frame her as aggressive, overbearing, or fake. The same footage she posted to promote her wellness brand, footage that once brought her clients, was weaponized to rewrite her memory. Her legacy was now filtered through clickbait titles and monetized thumbnails. Meanwhile, people treated Chris not just as a killer, but as a character. They studied him like a documentary subject. They rewatched the polygraph video as if it were an episode of Breaking Bad. They commented on his posture, his voice, his clothes. He became content. Some sent him letters in prison. Others posted thirst trap edits. A few wrote fan fiction. This wasn't justice. It was spectacle. The danger wasn't just in remembering. It was in how people chose to remember. When crime becomes viral, so does distortion, and the lines between truth, myth, and entertainment blur. The Rursuchek family spoke out repeatedly. They begged YouTubers to stop profiting off their pain. They asked for basic dignity, but their voices were often drowned by algorithmic noise. This is the shadow of true crime in the digital age. When viewers become editors, when grief becomes a genre, when the court of public opinion replaces actual justice, and when the story of 4 murdered lives becomes a trending topic. In 2018, there was no law that could have stopped what happened at 2825 Saratoga Trail. No restraining order to issue, no red flag to raise, because Chris Watts never raised his voice, never hit anyone, never made a threat. On paper, he wasn't dangerous, and that's the problem. The criminal justice system, like much of society, is built to react to visible violence, bruises, injuries, 911 calls. It wasn't built to detect the danger of a man who simply detached. Shanann told friends she felt him slipping. She wrote, "He doesn't touch me. He doesn't talk to me. I don't recognize him anymore." But there was nowhere to take those fears. No crime had been committed. No law had been broken. In hindsight, it's obvious. He stopped engaging with the kids. He lied about work. He lost interest in shared finances. He spent hours on his phone with someone else. He was planning a life, just not the one they thought. The tragedy revealed a blind spot. Emotional abandonment isn't illegal, but in rare cases, it's the first step toward annihilation. Domestic violence experts began to push for changes. Coercive control laws, new screening methods in therapy and wellness checkups, training for police to look beyond shouting matches. But in 2018, the system simply wasn't equipped. Chris slipped through, not because he was clever, but because no one was looking for a killer with a soft voice and a polite smile. No record, no warning. And then, everything gone. This wasn't just a failure of one man. It was a failure of expectation, of what danger looks like, of what violence sounds like, of who society thinks a killer is. And until that expectation shifts, there will be more families like the Watts,